Hey everybody, it's me, Albatross. Good to be back. I'm not gonna lie. I made this video last night, and I was gonna post it when I said I was gonna post it. But I don't know, something told me that I might have went a little too far, maybe talked about some things I shouldn't have. So here I am gonna re-record it. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, I did want to clear something up too. I know I said that I was going to be reporting on the Montauk project, and originally I was, but you see, the Montauk project is so like deep. Like there's so much to that I decided to work on that one a little bit longer and drop this one because this is just like a single short article about Subproject 68, which took place in Montreal, Canada. But I will be doing more about the Montauk project. I just, damn, it just goes pretty deep. And I wanted to really do a good job researching it because it's a lot. It is a lot. But anyways, so this article that I'm going to read to you today was published December 23rd, 1984 by 60 Minutes. I can't actually find the video interview, so I'm reading the actual transcript that was from the CIA website. So, here we go. The reporter, the interviewer, is Ed Bradley. Okay. MK Ultra is not the name of a new James Bond movie. It is, or was, the code word for a secret CIA project which took place between 1953 and 1964, in which unsuspecting people were used in mind control experiments that left them emotionally crippled for life. MK Ultra consisted of more than 130 research programs which took place in prisons, hospitals, and universities all over the United States and Canada, which is what this project I'm reading about was based in Montreal, Canada. All right. Ed Bradley goes on. The CIA does not deny that the experiments took place. In fact, we'll show you an internal agency memo which admits their involvement. The rationale for all of this? Well, the memo doesn't say. But it's apparent that learning how to make people do things they normally would not do by controlling their minds is valuable if you're in the espionage business. All right, and Dr. Ewin, I'm just going to call him Dr. Cameron. I know, I suck at names. I can't help it. Okay, Dr. Cameron, an American who is now dead, headed the Allen Memorial Institute at the McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where the experiments took place. Dr. Cameron never told his patients they were being used as guinea pigs. And, okay, so now we're going to hear from one of the victims. Her name is Zal Orlico, and she says, I can't get over the rage that I feel that he would have done this to me and to other people. And the rest of that sentence can't pick it up, according to the report. It says unintelligible. Okay, and Bradley says, in 1957, Zal Orlico was suffering from depression, and it was recommended that she see Dr. Cameron. Now, Orlico goes on to say, her words, they took away the remaining years of my life. They really wrung them out and left me with a piece of rag to live. And that's not good enough. That's just not good enough. And it's not good enough for me. And it's not good enough for anybody else. And as long as I can open my mouth, as long as I can fight, I'm going to fight. And then the interviewer, Mr. Ed Bradley says, Mrs. Orlico decided to fight when she read a newspaper report about the CIA funding of the mind control experiments and suspected that she was one of the victims. Her husband, David Orlico, a member of Canada's Parliament, was able to help her find 8 other people who had been used as guinea pigs by Dr. Cameron when he was receiving funds through a front organization from the CIA. After obtaining their medical records, which did confirm that they were involved, they joined in a suit against the U.S. government, each asking for $1 million. And, spoiler alert, because I don't think they mention it in this article, but they do not succeed in their lawsuit, even though they had very good evidence and all of that. The reason that they didn't succeed in their lawsuit, get this, because Canada, the government of Canada, oh yeah, it's the government of Canada who will not, I don't know if they'll admit that it happened or they won't admit corroboration with the U.S. It's hard to say. I don't know. Maybe they'll say more. Okay. Each of the plaintiffs came here to the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal expecting therapy. Instead, what they got was a nightmare of experiments. There were electric shock treatments, many times greater than the norm. They were subjected to sleep therapy, long periods, often up to 60 days, during which they were drugged so much that the better part of each day was spent sleeping. During these periods, they were subjected to what's called psychic driving, the constant repetition of tape-recorded messages, often up to 500,000 times. They were also injected with drugs. A drug called Curare, which brought on temporary paralysis, and LSD, that's like the CIA's favorite, which led to terrifying hallucinations. All right, Mrs. Orlico is speaking now. He injected the lysergic acid into the vein. Then he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Now there, lassie, we'll see you later." And he went out and closed the door. Well, it was only a very few minutes before I began to feel very peculiar and things began to become very distorted, and I didn't seem to have any control over anything, and I started to feel very frightened, and the fright became a terror, and I sort of began throwing myself from one side of the room to the other. I didn't know what to do to stop this feeling. It felt like my bones were melting. I just didn't know who I was anymore. And pause. In my opinion, I can't really imagine anything more terrifying than someone giving me something like that against my will. I've always had this, fear of, the drugs of those nature. Okay? Because, yeah, I don't know if I ever told you all this before, but when I was at the hospital once, they put me under, and they used ketamine to put me under. And I don't even know if ketamine's a hallucinogen, but I hallucinated. I didn't go under. I hallucinated. I was literally seeing demons. It felt like I was, going, spinning in a whirlpool, going down to hell, being sucked to hell. It was, the scariest thing ever. It was so scary that, anytime I would have to go for a procedure since then, I just I'm allergic to ketamine because it scared me that bad. It scared me so bad. So, and this is LSD. I can't imagine the kinds of, oh my God, that sounds so scary. It sounds so scary. Okay, now the interviewer, Ed Bradley, is talking about another victim. Robert Logie was 18 years old when he came to the Allen Memorial Institute with severe leg pains that had been diagnosed as psychosomatic or caused by emotional problems. He got the full battery of treatment: sleep therapy, electroshock, many times the norm, psychic driving, and LSD. All that has left permanent mental scars. And what haunts Logie the most is the psychic driving, those messages drilled into his brain when he was virtually paralyzed with drugs. And Robert Logie is speaking now. I have a lot of questions about it now, and why I can't know what was on the tapes. And it just haunts me and haunts me, What were they trying to make me believe or whatever? And then the interviewer talks about another victim who, oh man, and this victim was a doctor. Dr. Mary Morrow was a physician who came to Dr. Cameron to ask for a fellowship in psychiatry. Oh my God, she didn't even go there as a patient. Oh my God, she was, trying to do her fellowship. She had gone through a period of depression, and Dr. Cameron told her she looked tired and nervous, and he would not consider her for a fellowship unless she underwent sleep therapy. She thought that meant a period of rest with sedatives administered periodically, so she consented. What she got was electroshock depatterning. All right, now we're going to hear from Dr. Mary Morrow. He used 67 times the average dose of electric current by pushing the button of the electric shock machine 6 times in succession rather than 1. And besides that, instead of getting it 2 or 3 times a week, one press of the button, like most physicians do, he gave it in daily successions. I was suspended in space in a deep black hole. I had no idea that I was a human being. I was without knowledge of my appendages. I had no sense of solidity. I was floating. I was completely disoriented. I thought I was an organism. And we go back to the interviewer, the interviewer, Ed Bradley. The result, Dr. Morrow lost her identity. Dr. Morrow's mother saw what was happening to her daughter and demanded that she be released from the Allen Institute. When she regained what she calls her human identity, Dr. Morrow realized that her treatment had nothing to do with healing. In fact, she had suffered permanent brain damage. And now, Dr. Mary Morrow speaks. Apparently, according to this transcript, there was a whole sentence there where they couldn't tell what she was saying. And then in between all that unintelligible talk, she said absolutely gone somewhere. Okay, and then we get back to what the interviewer can hear. In a nutshell, my life today is in shadow. I'm left with a permanent difficulty, which is called, and that's redacted, that is redacted. I could talk to you and, somewhere redacted. If I meet you tomorrow in a changed environment, I don't know you're Mr. Bradley. If I meet you in redacted, in a local supermarket or on the water, I don't know you from Adam. And then Ed Bradley, the interviewer, goes on to another victim. Oh, no, sorry, not a victim, but someone who's there to defend Dr. Cameron, who is Dr. Elliot Emanuel, who was a junior associate under Dr. Cameron. Although he was not part of the brainwashing experiments, he defends Dr. Cameron and raises questions about his patients. And Dr. Elliot Emanuel, here's what he has to say. There, you have to bear in mind that these were mentally ill patients. I insist on that. They weren't there because for any other reason, to my knowledge, they were mentally ill patients, and their perception or their recall 30 years later of the events may not be perfect. And the interviewer goes on to say, memories may not be perfect after 30 years, but there is no doubt about the experiments conducted by Dr. Cameron and funded by the CIA. This internal agency memo from the CIA's General Counsel refers to the substantial funds flowing from this agency to McGill in support of the project. And it goes on to say that the use of drugs, particularly intensive electroshock, suggests that long-term after effects may have been involved. Are you not at all disturbed about what he did in using human beings? And here is Dr. Emanuel's answer. In the context of the time, innovative medical treatments inevitably have the aspect of being experiments. There's nothing so terrible about that. And then Ed Bradley responds, but there's a question of misuse, and there are people who are claiming that they were misused. Then Dr. Emanuel responds to that. I think it's going to be very hard for those patients to prove that their present condition was due to experimentation beyond what would be acceptable treatment at the time. Gaslighter. And then interviewer Bradley says, oh, he's introducing another doctor who is Dr. Harvey Weinstein. No, not the same Harvey Weinstein that, is in prison right now. This is a different one. Okay. I have no idea if they're related. I have no idea about any of that. But Harvey and Weinstein is a fairly common name. So don't make a thing of it. Okay. So Bradley goes on to say, Dr. Harvey Weinstein, a psychiatrist and professor at Stanford University, spent years researching what happened to Cameron's patients at the hospital during the time of the CIA-funded experiments. Why? Well, his father had entered Dr. Cameron's care with a mild neurotic condition and came out several years later with physical brain damage and a complete change of personality. Okay, so Dr. Harvey Weinstein's father was a victim. Okay. And Dr. Harvey Weinstein goes on to say, what Dr. Cameron seemed to do was to take these and to use them not only on people who were severely ill, and he did do that, but to use it on people who were mildly ill, people with neurotic conditions, people for whom these kinds of treatments simply were not indicated at all. And when someone says to me that what was being done there was the standard of the time, I balk, because it was not the standard of the time. No one anywhere was putting them together in this kind of package. All right, and then Bradley, the interview, goes on to say, but they were sick, many of these people. And then Dr. Weinstein responds, the fact that some people were neurotic, that is, did not have conditions that were a major disturbance, does not mean they weren't people who were rational and capable of thinking and remembering until this work was done. Yeah, let's remember, one of them was even a doctor herself. But anyways, and then the interviewer goes on to say, from 1957 to 1960, Richard Helms and his associate, Sidney Gottlieb, were responsible for the CIA's MKUltra. In 1973, just before he left as head of the agency, Helms and Gottlieb, in clear violation of government regulations, set out to destroy all of the records of MKUltra. But they overlooked a few financial documents, which showed that the CIA, through a front organization, had spent at least $60,000 on the brainwashing experiment. And because of the destroyed records, no one can say how much more was spent. And apparently both Richard Helms and Sidney Gottlieb declined Mr. Bradley's request for an interview. Big shock. Okay. Mr. Bradley continues. A Senate subcommittee investigation into the CIA brainwashing experiments led to a recommendation that the CIA find and compensate the victims. A recommendation that was accepted by then CIA Director Stansfield Turner. But to this date, none of the victims in this case have received compensation or even an explanation of what happened. Yeah, it's so messed up. It is so messed up. Because if you all watch my other videos, you know that the two main guys responsible for all this, Richard Helms and Sidney Gottlieb, they didn't get any repercussions whatsoever. In fact, they went on to live their best lives. They got to retire, but after becoming ambassadors and writing books and traveling the world and did all this stuff, even after the government and everyone knew this had happened and that they deliberately broke laws destroying these documents, they went on to live their best lives. Which is another reason why I believe, in my personal opinion, that MKUltra may be under a different name, but it's still very much active. But anyhow, let's continue. Mr. Bradley goes on to introduce someone else. Oh, yeah, the lawyer for the plaintiffs, the victims, whose name is Joseph Raw. I think that's how you pronounce the last name. Okay, and Joseph Raw says, you know, it's a wonderful thing that the CIA says, they say, well, we only put up part of the money. But can you imagine saying, I only gave half the money for shooting somebody? Well, you know how long it would take to make that defense ridiculous? That is exactly the defense that the CIA has. And then the interviewer, Bradley, says, Ross says his evidence tying the CIA to brainwashing experiments will help his clients only in a court of law. And he says the agency has effectively stalled their day in court. According to Raw, they never put up anything or give you any material voluntarily. You've got to go to the judge, and then they've always got rights to appeal. They're masters at stonewalling. So even though they agree that these victims should be compensated, they fought these victims like tooth and fucking nail. Even as recently as 10 years ago, there was a case in court fighting a victim, fighting to get compensated. I made a video about him. What's his name? Wayne Ritchie. Yeah, go watch my video about Wayne Ritchie. And Wayne Ritchie was an employee. He was a he was in the military. He was a U.S. deputy marshal. And they did it to him. And just 10 years ago, they totally dismissed the case, saying, well, that because you're in the military, you know, what happened to you could be considered a course of duty. It's such bullshit. It's such bullshit. Sorry, it's making me mad. The more and more I read into this, the more mad and infuriated I get. Okay. Bradley says, the interviewer, Canadian officials have stated publicly that the United States government has expressed its regret over the CIA's actions in this matter. However, none of those Canadian officials would talk with us on camera about this case. And what's more, they have turned down all requests, even from members of Parliament, to make public the records of that apology. What? So basically, the United States apologized to these people. But Canada refused to make that apology public. Why? Wouldn't you think Canada would be pretty pissed off at the United States for coming into their country, taking their citizens and experimenting on them like guinea pigs? Unless they were involved. That's a possibility. But anyways, let me continue with this. Because, yeah. All right. And where was I? I'm sorry. Trying to find my place to make. Okay, yeah, there we go. These officials say that international practice and customs precludes the disclosure of information that was given in confidence. The plaintiffs in this suit against the CIA were permanently damaged by the brainwashing experiments. Most of them were even unable to talk with us. You have met the most fortunate among the 9. After decades of trying, Dr. Morrow, back to the lady doctor who was a victim, at the age of 60, was finally able to gain her psychiatric credentials back. She works at a small hospital in Ontario. So wow, it even ruined her career. Okay, the interviewer says to Dr. Morrow, how has what happened to you under Dr. Cameron affected your life? Mrs. Dr. Morrow said, it killed it. Bradley asked why. And then Dr. Morrow responds, absolutely. I'm 61. I've been 24 years on this case. My life is misery. And then she goes on to say more, but it's unintelligible. And then Bradley goes on. to talk about Robert Logie. When Robert Logie finally had an opportunity to examine his medical records, he learned that after the electroshocks, LSD, and psychic driving, doctors decided his leg pain was not psychosomatic at all. A few shots of cortisone ended the pain in his leg. Wow. So they were literally trying to claim that the electroshots, the LSD, the psychic driving, and the sleep, that all was to find out what was wrong with his leg, I guess, apparently. All right, well then Logie goes on to say, physically, there's places you can go and have counseling and support groups and whatnot. But when you're mentally raped, there's nothing. And I don't trust any psychiatrist who might be able to help me. I couldn't trust one enough to get the help that I need in dealing with this. And yeah, that's so messed up too, because in a way that's what like Allie Carter and Shelley Carter have been like saying. It's like, of course she needs help, but how do you go about trusting psychiatrists to help? How do you go, after all, how do you go about that? Okay, and Bradley goes on about Mrs. Orlico. Mrs. Orlico suffers from flashbacks, from depression, fear of crowds, and fear of heights. Finally, knowing what really ruined her health is her only consolation. Until you find out about the experiments, until you find out that you were brainwashed, what did you think of all that had happened? Mrs. Orlico, this is her response. And this is the last part of this interview. It's very sad. Mrs. Orlico said, I thought I had failed. I thought I had failed. And I am guilty of being like this because I failed at something I shouldn't have failed at. And David and Leslie have to put up with me. And I am guilty. Well, when I read about it in the paper, the one thing that lessened considerably was the guilt. I didn't feel so guilty anymore. I felt it wasn't all my fault. Thank God it's not all my fault. Because, it's a terrible thing for people to have to put up with someone who has sometimes a quarter of a life, sometimes a half a life. Maybe once in a while you get almost to the peak of a full life, but you don't stay there very long. I want to repeat that last thing she said. I want to repeat it. Listen carefully. It's a terrible thing for people to have to put up with someone who has sometimes a quarter of a life, sometimes a half of a life. Maybe once in a while you get almost to the peak of a full life, but you don't stay there very long. That sounds like DID to me. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what it sounds like to me. So yeah, basically since Canada, I don't know what Canada's deal was. I don't. I mean, I can sit there and say it's probably because they were involved, and maybe they were. But the thing about all of this mess is it's like, it gives people an opportunity to hide their... For example, like when the Freedom of Information Act came about and the CIA, they were looking directly at the CIA, Mr. Gottlieb and Richard Helms, they decided to destroy a whole bunch of documents. A whole bunch. My question, I guess, is, well, if the ones we've got that they didn't get to are horrible enough, how fucking bad were the ones they destroyed? If the ones that were left behind weren't as important. Because they're pretty bad. This whole situation, especially with the doctor who got electroshocked like a whole bunch of times, that sounds similar to a TV show, doesn't it? Stranger Things. Just like Allie and Shelley said, they're literally laying out what they are trying to do. The only thing that they left out in the show, was the fact that they used trauma-based mind control. It was either Helms or Gottlieb, but one of them, when they were talking about that Operation Midnight Climax with the brothel, one of them actually literally said, when they were trying to find out why they would include sex in all of this, and he literally said that we have found when people are under the influence of a combination of drugs and sex, they are a lot more prone to susceptibility. Literally, someone, a part of the CIA, came out and said that. So, you know, and one more thing I'd like to leave you guys with. All through recorded history, practically every government has tried to do something similar to this. Control the people that control their citizens, right? All through recorded history. Ask yourselves why. Please ask yourselves why. In the last 40 years or so, we have actually started to believe that our government would never do such a thing. Even though they were caught doing it already. We're just going to believe them at their word that, oh, well, we're not going to do it anymore. Yeah, oh, it happened, but that doesn't happen anymore. We're going to fucking believe that shit? Especially considering that not one of the victims have been compensated, that not one of the people running this bullshit who literally broke laws to hide their involvement, why none of them got in trouble? No one got in trouble. No one got compensated. Why? If it's over and it's never going to happen again, then why? Why? It's bullshit, and you all know it's bullshit. Thank you for listening. The links to these articles will be in the description. Thanks. Have a good day.